This week on Dig Me Out. With your hosts, Jason Ziak and Tim Minichi.
Jay, we're back again with another episode thanks to our Dig Me Out Union on Patreon. You can help us make the next episode happen by joining us at dmounion.com or digmeoutunion.com. And Jay, this is a patron selected poll episode. The patrons get to vote every month. 9 albums thrown into a hopper, spun around, twisted and turned, flipped upside down. Spits out, we get these from our website, digmeoutpodcast.com. People suggest an album. Maybe they throw a comment in there. Maybe they don't. Depends on how shy they are. And we put them in a poll. Well, you do. You do the work on that. I just sit back and drink my margaritas.
Did you used to watch the lottery as a kid?
Mm-hmm.
On TV?
Oh, yeah. Still do. Love it. It's my favorite show.
Is it still on TV?
They still do in Ohio. They still do like the drawing for like something
with the machine with the fancy ping pong balls.
Yes,
they still do that on TV.
I think they do. It's like at 7:30 on Saturday. I would be maybe they've moved it to just online, but there's still some component that's live.
I want to say they used to do it. Is it once or twice?
I think it's Wednesday and Saturday.
Okay. Yeah. A lot of
because there's also those second chance where you didn't win, but you send it in or something like that, and your number can get picked, and then you get a second chance at the lottery, drawing. God. Yeah, it's that
was must see TV.
Get
around. You get your lottery tickets, watch the lottery. Let's watch them pick the numbers.
I'm feeling phone like books are here.
I need to upgrade the hopper, and we need to have like a live event.
There you go.
With some kind of a elaborate machine that you can tumble them, or you see them like flying around, and I reach in and like grab them.
You should be in the metaverse, and the band all of these album covers are flying around, and you grab them and throw them onto the grid.
There has to be an element of surprise, though.
Right.
It's the ooh. I didn't think we were gonna see an 8.
Mm-hmm.
I thought for sure that was gonna be a 4, but we got an 8. Wow, didn't expect that.
Let's talk to Zuck about getting this onto the metaverse. And I think we got a thing here. What we have here actually, Jay, is 9 albums, and one of them won. And it wasn't really close. I was surprised. Maybe it was close at some point, but there was a lot of people talking about records, a lot of people talking about albums, talking about bands, and not a lot of them talking about the winner as usual. For some reason, the winner always gets the least amount of comments, but the most amount of votes. I don't know how that works. Here were the picks. So here were the picks, Jay, for October of 2021. Richard Waterman suggested Under the Wishing Tree by Charlie Sexton. Darren Lehman suggested Amorica by the Black Crowes.
I'm shocked that one didn't win.
Yeah, I don't know what happened there. It didn't even come in second.
Yep.
Eric Peterson suggested Viva Zapata by 7 Year Bitch. Willie Dillon suggested What Fun Life Was by Bedhead. Kyle Bittner, Splendor Solace by The Tea Party. Matt suggested Blue Hour by Smack Melon. Alex suggested the self-titled record by the Pulsars. Neil Foltz suggested Today's Active Lifestyles by Polvo. And David Haverland suggested The Pace is Glacial by Seam. By a significant margin, Polvo, Today's Active Lifestyles, won it. Was shocked.
Yeah, I kind of get it. But if you'd asked me going in, I would have said either Pulsars or Black Crows. Maybe the Tea Party with our strong Canadian
And Tea
contingent.
Party came in second, just 4 votes behind. Pulsars were third. Black Crows were fourth. And then it's a big drop off to Seam and 7-Year Bitch. Everybody got votes this time, but it was pretty spread out amongst the bottom half of the picks. So congratulations to Neil Foltz, who suggested Polvo. And Jay, were you familiar with Polvo?
Yeah, I remember. What was it, 2013 or 9? They put a record out. It was kind of
2009 was in Prism. Yeah.
They made a little bit of a blip of like, hey, these guys were a band in the 90s and they put out a record prior to, like, I think a lot of the 90s bands reuniting. Now it wouldn't be that big of a deal, but I think at the time it was like a bit of a little buzz around it. And I think I listened to that record when it came out.
Yep. I remember when that came out as well. I enjoyed it. I actually have the I think that got me into the band a little bit because I have the MP3s for everything they've put out up to that record. They did put out a record following that in 2013, Siberia. Before we get it, let's just do a little quick history of the band.
History of the band.
So they formed in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. Original lineup in 1990 was Ash Bowie, not related to David Bowie, and David Brylowski on vocals and guitar. They both sing and they both play guitar. Steve Popson on bass and drummer Eddie Watkins. Bowie and Brylowski met in a Spanish class, and the word polvo actually means dust in Spanish. It also means octopus in Portuguese. So Dusty Octopus is the interpretation of that name. They released a 7-inch on their own in 1991, and then a EP came out later that year on a small indie label. And then they ended up getting picked up by Merge for a couple of EPs and some 7-inches. And the first record, Core Crane Secret, came out in 1992 on Merge. That was followed by the album we're going to talk about, Today's Active Lifestyles. That came out in 1993. Then they moved to Touch and Go Records for 1996 double album, single CD, Exploded Drawing, and 1997's Shapes. Then there was the hiatus for 12 years. They came back in 2009 to release In Prism on Merge, and in 2013 Siberia, also on Merge. Now, when they got back together, I believe that Watkins was no longer playing drums, and they brought in Brian Quast to play drums on that record, I think. Perhaps. And they pretty much, I mean, it's been a pretty consistent lineup, is basically what I'm saying. Let's get into the comments over at Patreon. We got some comments. Who talked about Polvo? Not a lot. Kyle Bittner, he said he was definitely going with the Tea Party, so he didn't go with Polvo. Justin Wexler said somehow missed the Pulsars entirely in the 90s, despite being from Chicago. So he obviously went with the Pulsars. He said they're getting the vinyl reissue treatment. So if you're a fan of the Pulsars and you've been waiting for that, there you go.
I'm pretty sure that had been nominated prior, so feels like a record eventually we got to get to.
John Seaman went with the Black Crows. James Stelter went with Bedhead. Darren Lehman, he said tough pick between the Crows and the Tea Party. Anybody vote for Polvo here? Anybody talking about Polvo? Sean Brown, easiest poll in a while. Charlie Sexton all day long. Nope. Willie Dillon, it's Bedhead. Tea Party and Seam for me. Nope. Whew. Steve Muzinski, he went to bat. He's went with the Pulsars. Steven Music, also 7-year bitch. Aaron MC, I'm going with the Tea Party. Ryan Allen, initially I wanted to vote for Seam as they are having a tiny moment right now with some reissues coming out of their early material, and I've been rediscovering them. So great. It would have been interesting to dive deeper into the Pulsars or Bedhead records, two bands I didn't spend much time with back in the 90s. But ultimately, I have to go with Polvo. Thank you, Ryan Allen, for speaking
Finally.
up. Who have also been getting the reissue treatment lately, courtesy of Merge. Out of all the bands listed here, I feel like Polvo is the only one that seemed dead set on deconstructing and rebuilding the idea of a rock song in a completely unique way. There isn't another band that sounds quite like them, aside from maybe Sonic Youth, and their ability to be sinister and confusing while simultaneously melodic sometimes makes them great fodder for the DMO team to deconstruct as well. More people need to know about the sheer power of the Polv. Richard Waterman said, I will take the Tea Party over, but Amorica is the Crow's best album. Is it? That's a debate to have.
Yeah, it's decisive. Or it's not decisive.
It's up in the air.
Yeah, debatable. I'm a fan of that record, but I have not listened to it.
Over Southern Musical Harmony Companion?
It's those two for me.
Gotcha.
Back and forth. It kind of goes downhill after that.
Right. Ian McIver going with the Tea Party. Kyle Bittner, while I'm disappointed the Tea Party lost, Polvo proved to be an excellent opponent and a band I never listened to before. Excellent opponent. Come on, guys. This isn't war here. It's all music. It's all love. With a blend of intricate math rock rhythms and scorching noise, they seem to be a bit ahead of their time. Looking forward to checking out more of them. Darren Lehman, the Polvo album, while interesting, did not resonate with me. It would take a lot of warming up for me to want to listen to an album like that on the reg. I gravitate more so to melody, hooks, or strong vocals. Okay, well, we'll get into that right now. Jay, tell me one thing you liked about today's Active Lifestyles by Polvo.
It has this interesting back and forth for me as I listen to it, where I'm trying to. There's definitely the deconstruction element, and I'm trying to really understand: is this a band that is like incredibly sophisticated, or is it a band that is I want to say naive in the best sense, like they're just picked up instruments, they start playing together, and this is just a sound they start making, versus the former, which would be more like, they've been playing for a while and, super smart, super capable, and are now entering this phase of like, okay, let's start breaking this down and making it weird. And I can't quite figure, as I listen to the record, it has that energy of like that innocence to it, where it's just, it doesn't sound pretentious or like overly precious. It still has this rawness to it, this looseness, and that just makes it feel authentic. But then they're doing some things on here that I can't figure out how they work. The guitars are doing these bends and the bass is doing a bend, and like none of them are in the same key, but yet it kind of makes a chord. And you're like, why does that like, but it works. And so when I hear that, I'm like, well, you kind of got to know what you're doing to pull that off, because otherwise it just sounds like a mess. But it doesn't to me. Like I can hear this thread through all of it, usually because of the vocal, and I think one of the guitars seem to be more in lock with each other, but then the other guitar and the bass are just creating this dissonance and unexpected layers, chords, just sounds that I think make it, when it works really well, pretty epic. I like the material that's more dynamic, more percussive, the riffs that are sharper. They do a lot of like playing with time, dragging things down spontaneously. They do a lot with kind of big crescendos. They put a lot of space in, which I love, and usually in that space it'll be a minute, a breath, or like some focus on one of the guitars, playing like a chiming high notes. But even in those moments when they do that, like other bands, when they do it, they'll play a guitar part like that's kind of weird and unexpected. Like they use it in this band, I think they're using tremolos or they're bending a lot. And but then they'll do it 3 times in a row. And you're like, okay, well, that was a very like weird sound that now you've replicated 3 times in a row. So like that's a thing that was on purpose, and you can replicate, and it is supposed to sound exactly that way. So it's just this really interesting mix of, I think, really smart, sophisticated approach to deconstructing rock music, like Ryan said, but there's still like this innocence to it that I like quite a bit. It still has that, they're just in the garage working this stuff out kind of vibe, or a small club, seeing them live kind of feel. But it's just walking that line, where it has that, but it doesn't sound like a total train wreck mess. And they're always like right on that edge of like, this could go either way at any time. And I think, what makes the record fun is it's just so on it, like it's so hard to predict what they're going to do. You just don't know. A song will start and you'll go through 3 or 4 movements and changes fairly quickly. Like they don't belabor any of these. They're all for the most part, 3, 4, 2-minute songs. There's one 7-minute song, but 2, I guess. But you have no idea what to expect, and suddenly like a really cool riff will come out and like, wow, that is a really interesting melody, or that is I would not have thought to play that. So yeah, it's a surprise one after another when you listen to this record. I don't mind the vocals. I actually kind of like them. They're, I think, understated. They fit the music pretty well. It's with some bands like this that are a little bit more on the art rock side, the vocals can become, they're not only weak, but then they just become such a focus that it's hard to get past them. And to me, this vocally, they play to their strengths. They do a lot of doubling, which helps. It's very locked up with usually one of the guitars or the bass. So I don't mind the vocals. I think it adds a nice melody, a lot of element to it. It helps, I think, tie some of these songs together, like in terms of what the theme is melodically. So I don't have a problem with the vocal. I mean, for this kind of band, this is, what I would hope for. I don't expect the vocal to be like Robert Plant. So I'm okay with the vocal in this case. A little troll behind me. So yeah, it's just a lot of surprises. It's just it's a little bit of acrobatics too, I think, in terms of the dynamics and just all the places this record goes. So it's a pretty fun listen. I definitely think it sounds better on speakers. I listened to it with like in-ear headphones, and it sounded kind of small and not great. But when you play it through speakers, loud, it sounds way better. So definitely, I would recommend. This is a loudspeaker listen. You just gotta go for it. Put on your seatbelt and get ready, because it gets a little wacky. What'd you think?
Well, I agree with you. I think the most exciting part about this record is how I listened to it over and over again, and I will be damned, I could never figure out what was going to happen next. I listened to it 10 times, and I felt like I was hearing it the first time each time, because I was like, I don't remember what happens now. So like something crazy would happen. I'd be like, oh, I remember that, but I don't know what song it happened in. Like there's so many interesting, weird, like you said, like it sounds like all the instruments are out of tune with each other, and then all of a sudden they snap into something that's really interesting, and it might only happen for one measure. There are riffs that happen and they don't come back, or if they do, they come back in a completely different way, and there's massive time and tempo shifts all over the place. I agree with you on the headphone versus speaker listen. I found it much more enjoyable to listen to it just blasting loud, because that's where I think, obviously this is a guitar focused record, but I think that's where the rhythm section is helped the most, because when you listen to it on, I felt like my headphones didn't get the thump out of the kick drum that needed to be there. The guitars are obviously dominating, but when you get the full band, it gives you that experience of like seeing a band in a small club, and you're just sort of mesmerized by this craziness that's happening. And like I said, I couldn't keep track from, something was starting to go, okay, I remember the vibe of this, and I remember that this had like a chill vibe as opposed to a crazy freak out vibe. But I was never sure what exactly was happening next. And it was almost impossible to sort of break down. I mean, there were parts that repeated, but it was really hard to figure out, like, was this meant to be the chorus, or you just kind of had to let it wash over you. It's not in any traditional sense a guitar rock record that you're going to think of with regards to guitar gods. I mean, this is like the inverse of like a Steve Vai record, or you know what I mean? This is like the upside down Stranger Things version of a guitar god record, because there is, I mean, listening to this, you go, oh wow, these guys digested Sonic Youth. These guys digested a lot of really cool and interesting bands and spit them out in this unique way. And I'm with you. I don't know if it's technical ability or just really good ears on some really young, naive players, because it is really hard to make purposeful mistakes that sound okay.
Yep.
There's a lot of stuff that's the notes bend, and you're like, oh, where is that going?
You're like, uh-oh. And like, well, that kind of worked out.
In the hands of some not good players, it just sounds like terrible.
Yeah.
But when you know how to really control your instrument, I think that's the thing. I read that they were accused of like purposely playing out of tune in order to, like, I remember where it was. I was reading a review or an article somewhere. I'm trying to find where it was, but they got like criticism in some respects because they were so like, people were like, well, these guys are clearly like super technical musicians that are just dumbing it down for indie rock. And I don't think that's what I mean. These are college students, sort of figuring it out. And I would imagine, early 90s Chapel Hill, it's a pretty fertile scene because, like, not only are you getting those bands that are just starting up. I mean, you had like at that point, you had like Let's Active and Superchunk is just getting going and some other bands. But like, that's part of the circuit that like all the indie bands are hitting. So Husker Du is going through there, and the Meat Puppets and Sonic Youth and REM, and you're getting to see like all of these bands. What's the Cat's Cradle in North Carolina? I think that was like one of the big clubs for a long time. And I mean, I hear some weird like Husker Du stuff that Bob Mould would do, and I hear all those 80s indie bands getting filtered into this and just being able to distill it into this unique sound that is really not comparable to a lot of other bands in terms of being. I mean, there are a lot of bands that do angular math rock.
Yeah.
But sometimes they tend to be so technical and proficient.
Yeah.
It loses the feel. And there's still some like
it almost becomes like indie prog.
Yeah, and there's like a little bit, there's enough, I want to say sloppiness, because that's not the right word, but there's a looseness here to some of it that it maintains a more workman-like approach, as opposed to a dude playing a 7-string guitar and in every string is tuned to E, and he's so yeah, it's a crazy record. I mean, I probably listened to this at least 10 times, and I'm still like utterly confused as to what's happening. Because like I can pick out a lot of times, you and I, we've heard the same chord progressions,
right?
I don't know that there is a chord progression on this entire album that is in any way standard, that uses a 1-5-4 or any sort of like standard, there's so much weirdness happening. I would imagine they didn't finger a single bar chord on this entire record, and it is all just crazy, weird, self-created fingerings and chord forms and probably tunings too, because it's off the rails.
It is, but I found melody in it.
Oh yeah, they find melodies.
I found groove in it. I found all the things I'm looking for. They're just masked at times. They're unexpected. My brain can put it together, but it's still, I think, like you said, even on repeated listens, it's done in a way that makes it difficult to even start to, not only the first time not be able to predict it, but even the 10th time, the 20th time, your brain is still trying to learn what's going on, because you can't follow, the years of patterns that you come to expect in, pop and rock music. So, yeah.
Well, I think like I was looking through the songs, like Action is Vibe is an example where I kind of felt like, okay, this is, I understand what's going on. And then they get to this section where they ramp up the volume, and you would, in a normal setting, that would be sort of like this sort of 4/4 just rock out, but they throw in all of these weird, like they cut off the parts early, and the accents are in weird places, and I'm just like, I couldn't imagine. I imagine they have to work on that because everybody's got to be aligned because it's like very precise where they're hitting.
Yeah.
But they're just slightly off in terms of where they are. You have to practice that. You said you didn't want to go out like that. Didn't want to go out like that. You promised to deliver at a time of action. You said there's a fucking always comes in threes, and it's a challenge everywhere you see. But I won't do it like that for a while. So I don't know if like they're all just on the same wavelength. I know that there are bands that are like that where they're just they play it once and they get it. And it is much easier to, in my experience, to create something weird rather than to learn something weird. Because once you wire your brain to play it that way, it just sort of becomes muscle memory. Whereas if you're trying to learn somebody else's weird thing, it can kind of be hard to get into that same headspace that they were in when they created it. So I can understand that.
Action versus vibe. I even with a song like that, I started to pick up on what is the core of that song? What is that vocal doing? What is that melody about? What is that reference? Potentially, where's that coming from? And that's a song where I started to circle on like, oh, well, maybe this is like a really messed up Cars song. Like, wow. Like at the core, if you just played that on one guitar and a vocal, like it's a Rick Ocasek kind of melody that has, just been, mixed up, thrown in a blender and chaotic and punky and weird. So I started to get to levels of like melodically trying to understand like vocally and like where are they coming from sort of at the core of this stuff, which takes some time because there's the guitars on top that are really mostly the star of the show. I also heard a lot of reference that to cursive here, thinking that's probably where they got some of their more angular guitar stuff from. Is a band like this,
especially a lot of the lead work.
Yeah,
I heard a lot of that late 90s, early 2000s indie, where you'd have a really like sort of solid rhythm section, but then the guitar player could kind of dance around the E string and do some really interesting runs and stuff that were not always in time with the rest of the band.
And even the guitar tones, like they're very string heavy guitar tones. Like you don't hear a lot of amp, you hear more string. And when they play those high notes, it just real, I don't know, it just has this loud, this kind of heavy mid sound to it that just gives them almost like a metallic kind of vibe to it that it also reminded me of Cursive. But I could also hear on like Gemini Cusp maybe some of the Dinosaur Jr. influence, like when they start that riff off. I could hear that played style in the hands of Jay Mascis being pretty comfortable as a Dinosaur Jr. song. So I'm totally on board with you too on they seem to be maybe at their core like referencing 80s alternative, but just through a really inventive approach and presentation with the guitars.
What didn't work for you on the record?
At times I didn't love the drums all the time. I think there's a lot of material they're good. It didn't help. I think when I reviewed the record, I was listening to it on an earphone or earbuds, and it sounded smaller, like you had mentioned, like they just kind of get lost and they sound a little not up to the quality of the guitar playing. Not terrible, but I think for a band like this, like I'm always wanting the drums to be just really sharp and as amazing as the guitars, and sometimes they're not. And I think it also matches some of the material that's maybe not as strong. So it's not like Sure Shot, which is a little bit more straightforward in the delivery, and it relies more on the drums, isn't as interesting to me. Or a song like Shiska, which is again more drum focused, but as it plays out, it sounds a bit amateurish. Like it doesn't have that level of interest or sophistication to me.
Yeah, it that reminded me of, that had like in some respects like a Joy Division vibe to it, especially with the drums. Like they were so minimal and dry that it reminded me of Joy Division.
Yeah.
But I agree with you. The drums are not.
Misses here, and there's a couple spots where the drums, you're like, maybe this drummer could be better. It's not terrible. I mean, there's some of that records we reviewed where you're like, okay, this drummer's killing me and killing the record. It's not like that. It's just I think the guitar playing is just so next level that I want the drums to always be there too.
Yeah, I get that. And I A-B'd it with the record we talked about, In Prism, that came out in 2009, and I think just the overall sound of that record made me realize why I struggled when I went back initially to this band, which was the 2009 record, which was produced by Brian Paulson, who did a bunch of like Jayhawks records and stuff. And it's a much fuller sounding band. The drums sound big. So when they are doing these really cool guitar riffs and things that are supported by the rhythm section in a much more full way. And I think that's why that record worked better for me. Years ago when I went back and first checked out this band, I didn't stick with them because I was like, I don't get what's going on here. Realizing that now that, with all the records we've listened to and the various influences that I can hear in this band, I can pick up a little bit more on what's going on and I understand a little bit better. But I don't know if it's the same drummer or not for that record. I need to check, but I don't think it let me see here. I don't know. It doesn't say, but it even sounded like it might have been the newer drummer.
Yeah.
Or the new drummer at that time, because it was just sounded better.
Yep.
So
yeah, and this kind of music, I don't know, I've gotten used to things are in this like post-punk kind of art rock usually have a really great drummer. I don't know. So
right.
I'm a bit expecting that. And it's okay. Maybe it's just the production too, or just the performance, or for this particular record, it's just not extraordinary.
Yeah, which, like you mentioned, in a lot of cases, it is the drummer that sort of like secretly, propels the band.
Yeah. Which is kind of surprising that this works as well as it does, because I think in the past when we've said records that are a bit more adventurous, if you don't have a drummer that's amazing, it can quickly become thin and fall apart. But I think to your earlier point, they seem to really be in tune with each other, so it kind of makes it all even out and work.
Smarter, older, just got me rolled by desire.
Now, this came out in 1993. It was obviously in no way, shape, or form a radio album. I know this was probably a college radio record. Probably got played on. I mean, to be honest, WFAL would have had a hard time slotting this in, because even WFAL, which was playing alternative music at the time, was still playing sort of like radio alternative as well as college alternative. This probably would have gone to like the more specialty underground indie show as opposed to just the regular rotation back at that time.
That's saying something.
Yeah. Well, because this is
too weird for mainstream or for. Wait, so WFAO was like the weirder of the two.
No, BGU was the one that had like the world music programs, and WFAO was the more mainstream of the two stations.
Was it?
Yeah, because it played like Alice in Chains and Stone Temple Pilots, whereas WBGU like did not play any of that stuff.
They were less rock centric, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Right.
But still, you're talking about putting this on like in the context of a college radio station. You're still in the the late night really strange show.
Right, exactly. Yeah, at least for I mean, now not every school had two radio stations. So that was a unique situation, and now they don't have two radio stations. So that's part of the.
But even if you imagine, I mean, just to paint a picture, like imagine your college radio station, regardless, like this is, which usually plays weird music. This is still going to be,
a tough sell
slot.
Yeah. So worthy album, better EP, decent single. Where do you land, Jay?
I landed at a worthy album. I really only have two songs on here that I don't love, but this is only a 41-minute listen. I mean, not a long record for, which is good. I mean, the amount of information you're taking in when you're listening to this is a lot. So they were smart to keep it short, or on the shorter end. And I'm still deconstructing it. My brain is still processing it.
Yeah.
But again, I love the not being able to always predict what's going to happen. I love the spirit and sort of the energy of the record. I think it sounds real. And they don't sound, like you said, they don't really sound like anybody else. We've mentioned other bands. You can hear things are there here and there, but really they've hit on something that is very unique to them. And they were able to do it for, more than one record, which is pretty extraordinary too. So, and I think it's probably, a bit influential, if you like some of the stuff we talked about in the later 90s, it gets more angular, maybe even some of the emo-ish stuff, the post-hardcore stuff. It would, it's not hard to imagine this band was influential in some degree. So yeah, I think it's a worthy record.
Yeah, actually, Sadie, I don't know how to say her last name, Dupuis of Speedy Ortiz.
Mm-hmm.
She's a huge fan of this band and actually interviewed Ash Bowie and Steve Popson when was that? 2020, last year, when they reissued, I guess, the stuff on vinyl. She did an interview for Talkhouse, and they said their quote was, "We were just a band, one of 1,000 really good bands that played shows. We were stoked that people actually liked listening to what we did. It still is shocking to me 30 years later, the reissue. I have no idea if it's 40-year-old people, 50-year-old people restocking this stuff, or if there are 18-year-old people out there buying it. I'd be shocked if it's the latter, but I just don't know." I could imagine, I think this is something that a kid who's into indie rock now could stumble into this and it's completely fresh and new to them.
Yeah, I could. Who knows if this would ever happen? But this is so counter to, like, as pop music evolves, we continue to kind of extract information from it. It gets simpler and simpler. So, like, I could see this being very, like, mind blowing for, like you said, a kid that's into indie rock, maybe like a little bit into 90s stuff and like into weird guitar stuff, to go and listen to this would be, they could, could be their new favorite record.
Mm-hmm.
It has that weird appeal of, like, it's so out there and different, but yet has enough familiar about it to still make sense.
Yeah, like the lead singer of Cloud Nothings, which is a fairly like successful indie rock band around now, is a fan of the record. So like, imagine if you're into that band and you're like 17 and he says, yeah, I'm really into Polvo, and you go to Spotify and check him out. I mean, that would be a mind-blowing thing for me if I was that age and hearing this band, I'd be like, what is going on? So I agree with you. I think this is a worthy record. I think you have to digest this as a record. There's no, and it actually works out really well with the way that they did the track listing. Each side of a vinyl ends with a 7-minute song, if you look at it.
Yep.
So I think it's a nice way to sort of build towards these epics on each side of the record. So that's 2 worthy albums for me and Jay. I had no idea how this was going to go.
I didn't know either.
Because we have heard other bands that have tried to do this and just been like, it doesn't work.
Yep.
But this band, they got something that people should check out if they haven't. They should go to, I don't think this band is active anymore. The last thing they did was the 2013 album Siberia for Merge. But you never know. There might be get them out there again after the COVID. Maybe get it out, do a show or something like that. Play a reunion show or something. But I want to thank our original suggestor. That was Neil Foltz, who suggested this record. If you want to suggest a record like Neil did, you just got to go to digmeoutpodcast.com, go to the suggest an album section, put in your suggestion, and it will end up in a poll just like this. It's magic how that happens. Pure magic. And you can also, by joining as a Patreon to vote on this, you get access to all kinds of stuff like the video. You get to see the video, get to see our pretty faces for each episode. Whether it's just me and Jay talking or whether it's a round table with a whole bunch of people talking. Oh, not at the same time. We take turns. But you also go to Patreon to get box newsletter every week. It's delivered via email to your inbox, but it's also at Patreon. 2 new reviews every week of new releases, albums, music is usually albums, maybe EPs, occasionally, rarely singles. Gotta get a good sample size. Singles are hard. But music, movies, books, even TV shows. If it's, what's coming up, Jay?
What?
The Pam and Tommy show on Hulu.
I can't wrap my head around that.
Have you seen the trailer drop today?
No.
Seth Rogen plays the guy who finds the tape, and Nick Offerman plays the guy who actually turns it into a porn tape. And they both have incredible mullets.
This is a series?
It's going to be a series on Hulu. So it's not just like...
Didn't this happen in in the late 90s?
Yeah, but they were, they were like metalhead dudes. So they had mullets. Just watch. Okay. So what I'm saying is that's gonna qualify for box review. Do a little TV show. We need more of those. And you know what?
What network is this on?
Hulu.
Okay.
Alanis Morissette, her life is being turned into a series.
That was another head scratcher. because it's going to be a sitcom, right?
Yeah,
that's what I thought I saw.
It's gonna, there's gonna be like a laugh track. Like Alanis will walk in the door and it'd be like, they'll be laughing, and they'll end with like a moment of reflection on what happened during the episode. Like a good family comedy from ABC in the 1990s. And so anyway, that's what's available via the box. You get the reviews of 80s and 90s relevant movies, books, and music. And then last but not least, Apple Podcasts. If you enjoy the show, please consider leaving us some kind words, 5 stars, a bottle of champagne, whatever they allow you to do over there. Make it happen at Apple Podcasts. For Jay, I'm Tim. We're out. We'll be back next week with another episode of Dig Me Out.